Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're not in a castle or a king's hall, but out in the long shadow of the 30 Years' War, a Europe of mud roads, drifting smoke, and soldiers who march farther than they can remember. You're not a noble or a commander, just an ordinary foot soldier moving through a world that's tired of choosing sides. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You surface into consciousness the way a stone rises through mud, slowly, reluctantly, and without any real desire to meet whatever air waits above. Your eyes open because they must, because the world around you has begun its quiet shuffling, that tired choreography of men who have risen too many times to consider the act meaningful. It is a kind of waking, though the word feels too optimistic for what your body performs. You blink into a greyness that might be morning, though the light isn't sharp enough to make promises. It simply exists, a thin sheet draped over the camp, neither warm nor cold, neither welcoming nor hostile, just present. Present in the way mist is present, or bureaucracy. You lie still for a moment longer, not because you wish to rest, but because your joints negotiate with reality each time you return to it. A breath moves through the wet canvas above you, carrying a scent that is becoming familiar. Yesterday's fire, soaked by the night, now exhaling faint streams of steam and regret. Somewhere nearby, a kettle coughs on coals that refuse to commit themselves fully to flame. You hear the hesitant clatter of metal, someone rummaging for a tin cup, someone else searching for a spoon they are half certain they never had. Your body decides you have been horizontal long enough, and so you sit. The blanket slips off your shoulders with the soft, damp sound of wool that has lost its ambition. You stretch your fingers, testing each one, making sure the night hasn't stolen anything important. They respond, stiff but functional. The rest of you follows, though your legs complain in a tone that resembles an old man muttering at the weather. You rise in increments, as if climbing the rungs of invisibly thin ladders. Outside your tent, the camp spreads across the clearing like a tired animal settling into its own bones. Tents sag in the middle, softened by moisture and constant folding. Ropes droop like they, too, have slept poorly. Your fellow soldiers move about with that practiced indifference, shared by people who have repeated the same small tasks for so long that their hands have taken over. A man 2 tents down ties his boots without looking at them. Another sits on an upturned crate, letting smoke curl from a pipe that probably tastes of the past 10 days. You navigate the narrow path between tents, where mud has arranged itself into patterns of boots and puddles. Each print overlaps another, like a record of footsteps trying to overwrite itself. The ground here remembers better than you do. You pause when a faint breeze slides through the camp, nudging a tapestry of smells toward you. Burned fat from last night's ration pot, old leather, damp straw, and the faint sweetness of a crushed sprig of pine someone stepped on. It is not a pleasant combination, but it is familiar, and that familiarity brings a strange, diluted comfort, as if the world, for all its indifference, has at least decided to be consistently indifferent. You look toward the eastern edge of the clearing, where the sky seems marginally lighter. If that is dawn, it is a shy one. The clouds above form an uneven blanket, stitched together by weather that has given up pretending to be predictable. You squint, wondering which day of the month it might be. The thought drifts away almost immediately. Time here behaves like smoke, visible for a moment, then lost, curling into nothing. The fire at the centre of camp is little more than a dark mound, faintly glowing at the edges. A few men hover around it, not to warm themselves. There is hardly any warmth to be had, but because it gives them something to face. You join them, lowering yourself onto a log that has served as a seat for more soldiers than you can count. The log sinks slightly under your weight, as if acknowledging your presence, with a weary sigh of its own. One of the men nods at you, a greeting so understated it barely registers. You return the gesture in equal measure. The kettle on the coals hisses with a subtle impatience. Someone pokes at the embers, stirring them enough to create the illusion of activity. The faintest flicker of flame appears, wavers, decides life is too much effort, and retreats. A few sparks drift upward, carrying miniature hopes before disappearing into the damp air. You watch them rise, feeling a quiet kinship with their slow, resigned climb. One of the officers walks past, his boots producing a determined sound that doesn't match the expression on his face. His uniform is the same faded mixture of colours that yours is: earth, smoke, and the unmistakable shade of long campaign. He clears his throat, as if about to give an order, but no words emerge. Instead he continues on, leaving behind the faint scent of paper sealed with wax, or at least the memory of such authority. A canteen is passed around the circle near the fire, and you take a sip when it reaches you. The water tastes metallic, reflecting the barrel it came from, with a hint of ash. Not surprising, considering where everything is stored. It is not refreshing, but it is wet, and that is enough. Your throat accepts it without complaint. Someone asks what day it is. The question floats in the air for a moment, suspended like a banner with no emblem. A few men shrug. One mutters a guess. No one bothers to disagree. You realise, with a tired sort of amusement, that the calendar has become more of a rumour than a system. You cannot remember the last time you knew the exact date. The war continues regardless, humming along like an administrative machine that operates whether watched or ignored. You glance down at your hands again. Cracked knuckles, faint bruises, dirt stubbornly lodged under the nails. They do not look like the hands of someone with a homeland. They look like the hands of someone who has belonged to the road too long, someone claimed by marching rather than by borders. The idea of allegiance feels abstract, like trying to remember a dream after too many waking moments. You recall a banner, a crest perhaps, or at least colours sewn together in a pattern that once meant something. But the memory slips when you reach for it, retreating into shadows that hum quietly at the edge of thought. Around you, the camp continues its slow revival. A horse stamps at the ground, unimpressed by the morning. A drummer taps a soft, unfocused rhythm on the edge of his drum. Not enough to be a signal, just enough to remind his hands they exist. A pair of soldiers argue gently about something neither seems invested in. A debate held more for routine than victory. Their voices drift away before you can understand the topic. You stand again when your legs decide they have rested long enough. The horizon has grown no brighter, though the world feels slightly more awake, as if the camp has collectively inhaled. Someone nearby begins packing away bedrolls. Others shake out cloaks or adjust their belts. The motions are rhythmic, almost ceremonial. You join them without needing instruction. Your body has memorized the sequence, learned through repetition, like the daily closing of a ledger. As you fold your blanket, the fabric exudes a smell, halfway between earth and wet sheep. You accept this without judgment. You tie the bundle and secure it to your pack, the knots familiar beneath your fingers. Each loop and pull is a small reassurance that you remember something, even if the memory is technical rather than personal. A bugle sounds in the distance, not sharp, not grand, just a single, long note that wavers slightly. The sound moves through the camp like a mild suggestion rather than a command. Men look up, acknowledge it silently, and continue their tasks. You feel it settle into you, a gentle nudge reminding you that movement will soon follow. Not a hurried movement, but the slow, inevitable progression the regiment performs each day, an unending line of footsteps stretching across lands that have stopped keeping track of who passes through. You shoulder your pack. The straps press into familiar grooves on your coat, settling in with the ease of something long accustomed to its place. The air remains cool, the kind of cool that doesn't wake you but keeps you from falling asleep again. You take a breath, tasting smoke and morning and something metallic that might be anticipation, though you doubt it. Around you, men begin forming into loose rows, guided more by habit than by instruction. Conversations dwindle, the fire crackles once, as if clearing its throat before dying back into its mound of embers. The sky remains undecided about dawn, hovering between dimness and indecision. You fall into step with the others, not because anyone told you to, but because rising and joining the line has become as automatic as breathing. The path ahead is still half hidden by mist, a soft blur of shapes and suggestions. You feel yourself lean toward it, propelled by the quiet certainty that the day must begin, even if you are not entirely convinced you have woken into it. And so you move forward, carried by routine, by hunger, by the low hum of a war that has lasted longer than recollection. The camp behind you fades into the grey, and the faint light before you offers nothing more than the promise of another mile. Nothing rushes, nothing changes, but you take the next step because the earth waits patiently beneath your feet, and your body has grown used to answering it. The road unfurls beneath your boots with the calm resignation of something stepped on too often to protest anymore. You fall into the column's rhythm without thinking, letting your body lean into the long, familiar pull of forward motion. The morning's greyness follows you, drifting above the men like a silent overseer. You hear the shuffle of boots ahead, behind, beside, a steady, uncurious procession. It carries the tone of a task done for so long that the purpose has dissolved, leaving only the motion. The earth underfoot has stopped pretending to be farmland. Whatever crops once lived here must have grown tired before you arrived. What remains looks like the memory of soil, staring blankly up at you. Dry stalks snap beneath your soles, making quiet ticking noises like the counting of hours you no longer track. Occasional stones nudge against the leather of your boots, small interruptions that fail to change the pace. A crow circles above, beating its wings in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It watches you all with an intelligence too detached to be pity and too practical to be admiration. You watch it for a moment, envying its perspective. How high it can rise before the war becomes nothing more than a smudge on the landscape. But the bird grows bored long before you do, and it turns away, leaving you with the trudging chorus of men whose thoughts are as heavy as their packs. The officers ride near the front, their horses stepping with a confidence. The rest of the company seems unwilling to mimic. Each animal exhales clouds of steam, as if commenting on the work ahead. Commands drift backward from the lead, thin as reeds and just as flexible. You hear something about direction, something about distance. None of it sticks. Orders dissolve into the wind, leaving only a general nudge forward, as if the entire regiment is being ushered along by an unseen clerk, stamping invisible documents. Your feet take on their usual routine. Lift, drag, plant, lift, drag, plant. The movement becomes so automatic that you almost forget you are participating in it. Your legs feel like they belong to a larger machine, the sort of machine built from too many parts, none of which entirely trust the others. Yet it moves, always forward, even when nothing else seems particularly interested in moving. A man beside you clears his throat, though the gesture sounds more like he's trying to dislodge a thought rather than phlegm. He adjusts his pack straps and sighs through his nose, a gentle, worn-out sound. You glance at him, he doesn't look back. His eyes are fixed on the horizon, that thin grey promise of nothing in particular. You mirror him without meaning to, letting your own gaze stretch into the distance until it begins to blur into the sky. The landscape rolls on in muted shades of brown and ash. Trees stand at odd angles, like they have been listening to too many contradictory instructions. Their branches scrape the air without animation, as though rehearsing a gesture they're no longer sure they want to perform. Every now and then, you pass a stump where a tree once stood, cut for fuel or cleared for space, or perhaps simply erased by time. The stumps remain as tired punctuation marks in a sentence that has gone on too long. Your breath settles into a steady tempo. You inhale the scent of churned soil and old smoke lingering in your clothes, and exhale into a breeze that seems indifferent to whatever it carries away. There is a faint sweetness in the air occasionally, a trace of something growing somewhere much farther than you will reach today. It reminds you of the idea of spring more than its reality. You adjust the musket slung over your shoulder. The barrel taps lightly against your back as you walk, offering a small metallic reminder of its existence. It has weight, but not enough to feel like a burden. More like a companion that refuses to contribute anything useful to the conversation. You wonder whether you would feel its absence if it vanished, or whether your hands would simply curl around empty air and continue marching out of habit. A small group of villagers appears in the distance, gathered near the ruins of a wall that once bordered something meaningful. They watch the column pass with the same expression one might give a passing storm, curious, resigned, and faintly inconvenienced. Their faces carry shadows of fear that have become too familiar to be dramatic. One woman clutches a basket of something that used to be vegetables. A child presses close to her skirt, peering at the line of soldiers with wide, exhausted eyes. You meet his gaze briefly. He looks away first, as if you've reminded him of something he had been trying not to understand too soon. The officers make no move toward the villagers. They simply guide the column onward, absorbing the sight without reaction. The war has turned people into scenery, and scenery into a kind of quiet witness. You keep walking, letting the village slide behind you until it becomes another smudge in the endless line of smudges this campaign has accumulated. Your mind drifts toward the notion of destination, a concept spoken aloud often enough to sound official. You think of it the way someone thinks of a town they've heard mentioned but never seen, a place constructed more from repeated insistence than certainty. The officers assure the men that the regiment is heading somewhere useful. The terrain, on the other hand, disagrees politely. Every hill you crest reveals another hill waiting patiently beyond it, as if the world has developed an unusual interest in symmetry. A drum taps at the front of the line, not in a cadence meant to inspire, but in one that resembles the ticking of an oversized clock. Each beat lands with the bland confidence of routine, marking moments without enriching them. You feel the rhythm seep into your bones, guiding your steps more than any sense of purpose could. Your shoulders ache in a dull, bureaucratic way, like a clerk stamping too many identical pages. You shift your pack to ease the pressure, but the relief is temporary. The straps settle back into their familiar grooves, resuming their quiet insistence that work must be done. The sun rises higher, though it seems reluctant about the whole process. Its light falls in thin streaks across the road, illuminating patches of ground in a way that suggests it is simply doing its job and not particularly interested in excellence. You appreciate the honesty. You have grown wary of anything that tries too hard. Somewhere ahead, a horse snorts, followed by the muffled thud of hooves stepping into soft earth. A banner flaps lazily in the wind, its colours muted by dust and travel. You recognise the pattern, though not with any sort of pride. It is an identifier, nothing more, a label attached to a collection of men who have long forgotten what the label implies. It flutters above you like a reminder from someone who assumes you still care. You bend your head to avoid a low-hanging branch that reaches across the path like an unmotivated gatekeeper. The leaves brush your coat, leaving behind a faint woody smell. You exhale, releasing a breath that feels older than the morning. Your neck aches, Your back stretches slightly. The march continues, smooth and unbroken, a quiet chain linking all the bodies in motion. As the hours accumulate, the road narrows into a trail that winds between soft hills. The grass here grows in uneven tufts, resilient enough to keep trying, despite the number of boots pressing it flat. You run your hand along the top of a patch as you pass, letting the blades whisper against your fingers. It's the closest thing to softness you've felt today. The column slows as the terrain shifts, though no one comments. You simply adjust your pace the way water adjusts to whatever container it's poured into. The trail dips slightly, then rises again. You follow its lazy curve, trusting it more than the men who claim to know the way. Trails don't lie, they simply exist. You admire that in them. By afternoon, the air takes on a heavier quality, thick with moisture, but not committed enough to rain. Your breath feels denser, your thoughts move more slowly, though that doesn't bother you. The pace of the march encourages a steady dulling of the mind, an erosion rather than a collapse. Your feet continue without asking for permission, sliding into the role they've practiced for longer than memory now cares to distinguish. You glance ahead. The line of soldiers stretches forward like a sentence with no punctuation, a thought that refuses to end. You keep walking, not because the officers say so, though they do, not because the road leads somewhere, though it might, but because your body has learned the shape of the march too thoroughly to abandon it now. The land widens again, opening into a broad expanse of muted colours. The wind shifts, carrying a subtle promise of distance. You inhale slowly, letting the air settle inside you. Forward remains the only direction offered, and your feet accept the proposal with quiet, practiced certainty. Step by step, you follow the column deeper into the vast, indifferent landscape. A figure moving through a war that has forgotten to end, toward a destination that exists only because someone said it should. The road bends gently to the left, tracing a line through open fields that have settled into a kind of weary acceptance. You follow the curve with the rest of the column, your steps sinking to the drag and lift rhythm your body adopted hours ago. The movement continues without thought, as if the landscape has taken your feet hostage and is guiding them forward out of habit. Ahead, where the trail dips slightly, a lone rider approaches. His horse carries the mud of several miles, splashed up the legs in dried arcs. The man's cloak flutters in a tired flutter, the fabric too stiff from old rain to move freely. You notice how the horse keeps its head low, as though it anticipates no kindness at the end of its journey. The courier reins in near the officers, his boots clicking against the stirrups with a dull, unenthusiastic sound. He reaches into his satchel and withdraws a bundle of folded paper, sealed with wax, the colour of dried berries. The seal catches what little light the sky chooses to offer, giving it a brief shimmer that feels out of place. It's the kind of confidence only ink and wax can afford, certainty pressed flat and made official. You watch as the officers gather close, taking the documents with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. They open the papers, eyes skim lines of text, a few brows rise, a few lips tighten. No one looks surprised. For a moment the column slows, the men instinctively sensing that something supposed to matter is happening. You shift your weight from one foot to the other. The air seems to pause, not with anticipation, but with the quiet patience of someone watching a familiar routine play out again. One of the officers gestures for a sergeant, handing him one page in particular. The sergeant unfolds it carefully, though not with reverence, more like a clerk handling a form that has passed across too many desks. He moves down the line, stopping every so often to let men glance at the contents. When the paper reaches you, you accept it without ceremony. Your eyes sweep over the words. Neat handwriting curves across the page, describing movements, destinations, and timings in a tone far more energetic than the conditions surrounding you. The instructions speak confidently about routes, supply points, and expected positions. You read each sentence, letting the letters arrange themselves in your mind. But the meaning evaporates almost instantly. You read the page again, more slowly this time. It still slides away from comprehension, as if coated in something that prevents it from sticking. The paper speaks of purpose, but the land you have been walking through knows better. The orders promise direction, but the horizon remains unchanged. You fold the page and hand it back to the sergeant, who nods, as if he too has practiced this exchange so many times that the acknowledgement has become a reflex. The men around you resume moving before anyone gives a command. The pause in the march dissolves into the steady pulse of footsteps. The courier rides off in the opposite direction, the horse carrying him away with the weary certainty of someone retracing a well-worn path. You fall back into place, the column stretching ahead like a long, deliberate sigh. The orders, now tucked away in an officer's coat, seem to weigh nothing. Whatever they instruct will filter into the day, slowly, an imperceptible shift absorbed by the existing monotony. Nothing abrupt, nothing dramatic, just another layer of intention draped over actions already in progress. A breeze curls across the fields, stirring a few loose tufts of grass. You inhale deeply. The air carries a faint scent of burned straw, lingering from some distant farmhouse, a reminder of the war's quiet persistence. It's not a threatening smell, more like a bureaucratic stamp marking. Territory by accident rather than design. One of the men ahead mutters something under his breath about the paper. The tone suggests neither approval nor frustration, just resignation. You recognize the cadence instantly. It's the sound of someone who has stopped expecting clarity from the world, but still feels obliged to comment on its confusion. The officers shift their positions, adjusting themselves in the saddle. They point toward the west, the direction mentioned in the orders. You all turn slightly, redistributing your weight to follow the new angle. The path complies for a while, drifting toward a cluster of bare trees leaning like elderly men, listening to a story they've heard before. Your feet welcome the slight change in direction, grateful for the illusion of progress. The movement is subtle, but it breaks the straight line you had been following since morning, offering just enough novelty to keep your body awake. Still, the change is small, too small to matter really. The land remains the same muted expanse of tired earth and scattered branches. You watch the sky as you walk. Clouds stack themselves lazily, forming soft shapes that drift without commitment. They look like thoughts half-formed, lacking the urgency to become anything more meaningful. A pale patch of sunlight presses through the edges, casting uneven patches of light on the road. The brightness doesn't warm you. It barely grazes your coat, but it adds a thin layer of variation to the march. The man beside you adjusts his musket, the metal scraping faintly against the strap. He clears his throat, glances at the officers ahead, and then lets his gaze settle on the path once more. You imagine he is thinking about the orders too, not the content but the weightlessness of them, the way they drift into the day, like a suggestion offered by someone who isn't obligated to follow it. You feel the paper's presence, even though it is no longer in your hands. Its message lingers like a half-remembered instruction, fading with every step. You try to recall the details, a location name that felt both unfamiliar and unnecessary, a date that might have already passed, a set of directives relying on roads that may or may not exist anymore. It all dissolves into a sort of administrative haze. The war thrives on such haze. You have seen it settle over men, over decisions, over entire campaigns. An indistinct fog that transforms purpose into repetition. You are part of that repetition now, moving with a column that trusts the road more than the ink on any page. By midday, the officers tuck the folded orders deeper into their coats, as though hiding them might make them more true. The horses shift again. The column curves once more, following a faint trail that slopes toward a shallow creek. The water trickles with the quiet determination of something that has decided to keep going, even if only out of habit. You cross the creek carefully, boots sinking into the soft bank. Cold water splashes against your heel. You step forward, letting the shock absorb into your bones. The sound of the creek fades behind you, replaced once again by the steady thud of boots and the soft rattle of gear. The day stretches onward. The land remains patient. The paper orders, somewhere inside an officer's coat, remain folded and intact, untouched by the dust and indifferent to interpretation. Their confidence stays trapped in the wax that sealed them, while you and the rest of the column march through a world that barely acknowledges their existence. The path continues forward, and you move with it, carrying the quiet understanding that instructions may speak loudly, but the land always whispers the truth. And the land, today, whispers, "Keep walking." The road narrows as the column approaches the first cluster of houses, their roofs tilting toward each other like conspirators whispering in the cold. You sense the shift through the way the air changes. Wood smoke thickens, the scent of earth fades, and something warmer, more domestic, threads itself between the marching bodies. It isn't a welcome, just a presence. The kind of presence that refuses to acknowledge you. As the houses come into view, the shutters begin to close one by one. They fall shut with crisp efficiency, like hands flipping through the pages of a ledger. You watch the last sliver of a window vanish behind a plank of wood, leaving behind the faint echo of hinges moved countless times for the same purpose. It's clear the people inside have practiced this routine long before your arrival, long before your officer's wax-sealed papers ever existed. The motion carries a familiarity that borders on muscle memory. You keep walking, your boots tapping a steady rhythm against stones that were arranged long before the war had reason to cross them. The sound is swallowed quickly by the empty village street. No one speaks. The air holds a stillness so complete that even the horses seem wary of breaking it. You inhale carefully, letting the smell of baking bread drift through your senses. The scent is warm, comforting, almost gentle, and it does nothing for you. Your stomach responds with a muted reminder of its expectations. But hunger has long since become a part of the daily landscape. It behaves like a quiet companion, present, consistent, and too familiar to inspire complaint. You picture the loaves cooling somewhere behind those shutters, crusts cracking softly, hands tearing into them. The image lasts only a moment before dissolving into the slow forward movement of your march. A dog sits at the edge of the road, tail tucked but eyes bright. It doesn't bark. It observes the passing line of soldiers with an expression that could be mistrust or boredom. You try to meet its gaze, but the dog looks through you instead, as if seeing only the column and not the men inside it. After a few seconds it stands, stretches with the unhurried ease of a creature not required to understand the war, and walks away behind a barn. One of the officers raises a hand, though the gesture seems more symbolic than functional. The column adjusts its formation slightly, narrowing to avoid knocking against the buildings that lean into the street. You shift your pack closer to your spine and angle your musket to avoid brushing it against a doorway. A small pile of firewood sits neatly stacked beneath an overhang, so neat that it feels out of place beside the disorder the war has cultivated everywhere else. A curtain lifts inside one house. A narrow strip of light flickers against the cloth. You catch a glimpse of a face, pale, still unreadable. It vanishes the instant your eyes fall upon it. The fabric drops. You can almost hear the quiet exhale of someone hoping the gesture went unnoticed. You don't stop walking. The column's steps echo against the walls, turning the narrow road into a corridor of rhythm. The sound repeatedly bounces back, softened, as though the village itself is absorbing your presence, trying to mute you into something less intrusive. You feel the weight of the place settle around you, an invisible pressure that asks nothing, protests nothing, but makes it clear you are merely passing through a life that has already adapted to being disrupted. You brush a hand against the edge of a fence post as you pass. The wood is smooth, worn down by seasons and routine. You imagine the hands that shaped it. Farmers, carpenters, labourers with their own aches and patience. Men and women who learn to read the world not by seals or wax, but by sky and soil. They must know the war is near, the same way they know when frost is coming. They react with shutters because what else is there to do? Some storms are too large for buckets or prayers. A dull thud echoes from within one of the houses. A pot set on a table perhaps, or a chair moved hastily. You glance at the door. It remains firmly closed. You imagine a family pressed against the inside wall, listening for your footsteps to pass. Not in terror. Terror is loud, shaking, frantic. This is something quieter. A practiced quiet. A long-term quiet. The kind that settles into bones. Your hand brushes the edge of your coat as the road widens again. The houses begin to thin. A few outbuildings, sheds, chicken coops, a stable with a sagging roof, linger at the outskirts, like reluctant spectators. A wheelbarrow lies overturned beside a trough, its wooden handles cracked. You smell manure mixed with hay, a scent richer than anything the road has offered in days. The wind picks up slightly, sweeping down the empty lane and stirring the edges of your cloak. You watch a cluster of leaves skitter across the ground, unsure whether they are fleeing or simply moving with the breeze. The sky hangs low above the village, pressing down in a soft, hazy sheet. It feels heavy enough to lower your shoulders and light enough to ignore. When the last house slips behind you, the silence of the village follows like a fading shadow. You realise it made no sound to mark your passage, no greeting, no plea, no threat. Just the steady lockdown of windows and doors, a withdrawal into the safety of walls that have learned how to withstand passing armies. You can't blame them. You barely trust your own march, let alone the purpose behind it. People living in these places must understand that armies are not storms because storms at least end. A patch of cultivated land stretches out just beyond the final fence line. Rows of soil lie in tidy lines, though nothing grows there now. The earth looks like it has been recently turned, as if someone is trying to maintain normalcy despite the weight hanging over the region. You wonder how a plough feels in the hands of someone who hears drums instead of rainfall, or how seeds survive being planted when the future is so unsure. You reach a fork in the path. The officers steer the column toward the right without hesitation. The left path leads deeper into farmland, dotted with abandoned tools. The right path slopes gently downward toward an expanse of open ground. Your feet follow the decision without argument. Behind you, one shutter creaks open again. You don't turn, but you hear it, timid, cautious, curious. Then it closes softly, concluding the village's role in this part of your march. The sound disappears into the breeze. Ahead, the road breathes again, no longer squeezed between walls, but open to endless fields. Your steps settle back into their familiar cadence. The scent of bread fades into the memory of something distant and unreachable, replaced once more by the dull mix of soil, sweat, and unwashed cloth. You walk on, carrying the quiet of the hamlet inside you, a quiet that clings to your senses like lingering smoke. It doesn't slow you or guide you. It simply sits with you, a reminder that there are places where life continues in small hidden corners, pretending the war is a temporary nuisance rather than a permanent condition. You march forward, letting the village fold itself back into the world behind you, its silence adding another layer to the long unbroken road ahead. The fields widen again after the last rooftop disappears behind the bend of the road. The sky opens above you, a pale sheet stretched from one horizon to the other. The air spreads out in long, even breaths. The column slows, then halts with a soft shuffle of boots, as though the land itself has requested a moment to collect its thoughts. An officer raises a hand, more out of formality than conviction. You watch him turn in the saddle and offer quiet instructions to the sergeants. Their nods carry an air of dutiful resignation. They begin guiding the men into lines, their gestures practiced and unhurried, as though they are arranging furniture in a room that hasn't changed in years. You move to your place in the formation. The ground beneath your feet feels dry, speckled with patches of struggling grass. A few clumps of earth crumble under your step. The field stretches out with the blank expression of something that has seen armies pass often enough to stop reacting. The first command arrives, short-clipped, not loud enough to frighten anything, with a pulse. You raise your musket automatically. The weapon feels heavier than you remember, though that might just be your arms reminding you they were built for carrying, not questioning. You angle the barrel upward, aligning your body with the rest of the line. The officer calls another command. The formation shifts in a slow ripple. You turn, pivot, reposition, each motion measured and mildly reluctant. The rhythm is familiar, the same slow choreography repeated across countless mornings and afternoons. You sense your own body performing it like a half-remembered hymn, the melody intact even if the purpose has faded. A breeze moves through the ranks, stirring coats and lifting stray strands of hair. It cools your face without refreshing you, like a polite gesture offered by someone who knows it won't fix anything. You inhale, tasting the scent of crushed grass and the faint metallic tang that lingers on the wind whenever soldiers gather in numbers. You lower your musket on command, the butt settling into the earth with a dull thud. The sound joins dozens of identical thuds around you, merging into a strangely comforting pattern. The field absorbs them all, patient and uncomplaining. The officer watches the line with an expression that looks like he is evaluating not your precision, but his own ability to appear authoritative. The drill continues, raise, lower, shoulder, present, step, turn. The movements occur with the steady inevitability of gears turning inside a clock, functional, repetitive, and neither inspired nor disappointed. You feel yourself slipping into the pattern, a quiet surrender to repetition. The predictability becomes its own kind of shelter. Your thoughts drift as your body cycles through motions older than the uniform you wear. You imagine the windmill analogy the drill always brings to mind, wooden arms creaking against the air, rotating without urgency, a task performed not out of passion, but because it is easier to continue than to stop. You wonder if windmills ever consider their own purpose, or if they too have learned to accept the rotation as its own justification. A sergeant walks down the line, adjusting a man's stance here, correcting an elbow there. When he reaches you, he pauses only long enough to nod, though you aren't certain whether he approves or simply lacks the energy to critique. You shift your weight slightly, easing the stiffness in your back. The next command calls for stepping forward in unison. You advance with the rest of the line, the ground giving a soft crunch beneath your boots. The men beside you move at the same speed, a gentle sway of bodies guided by habit. No one rushes, no one lags. The synchronicity is less about discipline and more about shared exhaustion. A flock of birds startles from a nearby tree, wings beating in a momentary burst of energy. Their movement feels almost extravagant compared to the regiment's methodical pace. They scatter across the sky, leaving you to wonder if any creature truly envies their freedom, or if even birds have their own kind of repetitive tasks. You pivot again, returning to the starting position. The lines straighten. The formation breathes collectively. The officer barks a command with slightly more enthusiasm, but the sound lands softly on your ears. You respond without thinking, your musket angled across your chest, in a stance so familiar it may as well be instinct. You catch glimpses of the faces near you, blank expressions softened by monotony. No one looks frustrated, no one looks driven. Everyone wears the same muted acceptance, as if you are all participating in a ritual designed to reassure the officers that the army still resembles an army. You suspect the officers know the truth but appreciate the illusion nonetheless. Another round of movements begins. Raise, lower, charge, return. The motions blur into a steady flow. You feel the weight of the musket shift from shoulder to arm to shoulder again. Each transition adds a faint strain to your muscles, a subtle reminder that your body still exists beneath the layers of habit and routine. The sun makes a half-hearted attempt to break through the clouds, casting a pale glow across the field. Patches of light drift over the marching lines like inattentive inspectors. You squint when the brightness grazes your eyes. The warmth doesn't linger. It passes over you quickly, moving on as if distracted. The commands continue. Step back, reform, present arms. Each order floats through the air, carried by voices that sound like clerks reading from a ledger. There's no urgency, no threat, only the steady hum of tasks being fulfilled. You sense the day stretching behind and before you, marked by increments of movement rather than any real measure of time. Your muscles loosen slightly as the drill goes on. Some motions take less effort than they did at the beginning. Others demand more as fatigue quietly settles into joints and shoulders. But none of it feels unexpected. The repetition buffers you from thinking too much, each action smoothing the edges of thought, leaving you with a soft, manageable hum inside your mind. A man 2 spaces down loses his balance slightly during a pivot. He recovers quickly, but the moment hangs in the air with a kind of understated humour. You nearly smile. The misstep feels like a tiny rebellion against the day's symmetry, a small reminder that humans, unlike windmills, sometimes falter. But the line absorbs the mistake without comment, and the drill continues uninterrupted. You take another step, your heel digging lightly into the dry soil. The field offers just enough resistance to remind you you're still here. A gust of wind tugs at your coat. The musket rests heavier against your palms. The commands form a low, rhythmic backdrop. Nothing sharp, nothing demanding, everything measured. As the drill shifts into its final sequence, you settle into the familiar motions with the ease of someone who has long understood the value of predictability. You raise your musket one last time, align your stance, and lower the weapon at the officer's signal. The infantry line holds the final posture for a moment, a collective pause that feels almost ceremonial. The officer lowers his hand, signalling the end. Men adjust their straps and shift their weight. Some roll their shoulders, others simply breathe. There's no applause, no declaration, no sense of accomplishment. Only the quiet understanding that the ritual has served its purpose, whatever that purpose may be. You take a slow breath. The field around you waits without expectation. The sky drifts above, faint and uncommitted. Your body settles into stillness for a brief moment, feeling the echo of the drill in your limbs. Then you step forward again, following the motion that begins before you even realize it has started, carried onward by the same rhythm that has stitched one day into the next with steady, unremarkable precision. When the last of the drills dissolves into evening, the field empties the day from its sky. The light withdraws quietly, leaving behind a soft twilight that pools over the grass in muted shades. The regiment settles into the familiar shuffle of preparing the night's stop. The same gestures, the same muttered exchanges, the same mild reluctance in every movement. You drift into the routine with the same slow ease, letting the task-heavy rhythm guide your hands. A few men gather scattered branches and the odd chunk of half-dry wood. The pieces knock together with hollow sounds that echo faintly across the open ground. Someone crouches near a patch of trampled earth and begins coaxing a flame out of damp tinder. You watch the first stubborn sparks flicker, fade, then return with slightly more conviction. Tiny bursts of light that seem unsure of themselves. Eventually, a hesitant flame catches. It licks at the edges of the wood, spreading upward in thin, wavering tongues. The fire reveals the faces around it in brief, flickering glimpses. Eyes reflecting orange, cheeks drawn tight by wind and days of marching. You settle onto the ground near the circle, your legs folding beneath you with a stiffness that suggests they are more accustomed to walking than resting. The fire gives off a small warmth, cautious and irregular. You extend your hands toward it, palms open to the glow. The heat touches your skin gently, as if testing whether you deserve it. Your fingers warm quickly, but your wrists remain cool, and your arms hold on to their lingering chill. You curl your hands slightly, trying to coax the warmth farther up. It stops at the same place every time. Voices drift around you, fragments of thought exchanged between tired men. None of the conversations form complete ideas. They trail off after a word or two, replaced by sighs or the sound of someone shifting their weight. A man mentions bread, another mumbles something about a horse's limp. Someone else begins to speak about a place they knew years ago, but the sentence dissolves and is never finished. The fire crackles, as if offering its own commentary, though it too speaks in half sentences. Sparks float upward, carried by a breeze that seems more interested in collecting them than extinguishing them. Each spark rises for a moment, flickers in the dusk, and disappears before reaching anything meaningful. They look like small pieces of thought that forgot where they were meant to land. You track them with your eyes until the air swallows them completely. The night deepens around the group, settling like a heavy blanket. Shadows lengthen and merge with the dark soil, turning the field into a muted expanse of shapes that blend into one another. The wind brushes against your coat, slipping easily through the worn stitching. It makes no effort to be cruel. It simply arrives and leaves, indifferent to the discomfort it causes. You draw your knees closer to your chest, trying to preserve what little warmth your hands have gained. The effort does little. Your bones remain wrapped in their quiet chill, as if they've decided warmth is something to observe rather than experience. The fire doesn't protest this decision. It gives what it gives, nothing more. Someone tosses another piece of wood into the flames. The fire reacts with a brief flare, brighter, louder, then resumes its soft, uneven rhythm. The wood shifts, sending a thin column of smoke upward. It drifts lazily, carrying the scent of burnt sap and damp bark. The smell settles into your coat, your hair, the fabric around your neck. It mixes with the odours of sweat and earth already clinging to you, forming a blend you've grown used to. The men around the fire lean in slightly, eyes half-lidded, faces softened by fatigue. A few clutch tin cups of water or thin broth. Someone attempts a joke, a dry, half-hearted remark about the taste of rations, but the punchline lands with the weight of a stone dropped into shallow mud. A few men exhale, the closest thing to laughter the night will allow. You feel the faintest pull at the corner of your mouth, not enough to form a smile. You watch the flames again. They shift endlessly, never forming a pattern, always devouring, always shrinking, always growing. The glow reflects in the metal of your musket lying beside you, turning the barrel into a thin line of wavering red. You barely notice the weapon most days, but in the firelight, it looks like a quiet obligation, waiting patiently for morning. A horse snorts somewhere beyond the circle, followed by the muffled thump of a hoof striking the ground. The sound fades into the darkness. A few men glance up, then back to the fire. Nothing in the night seems urgent. Even the noises that might once have provoked tension now melt into the background like the crackling of the wood. The field stretches outward in all directions, its boundaries dissolving as the last traces of daylight vanish. You sense the vastness rather than see it, an emptiness unbroken by walls or structures, only interrupted by the small circle of men gathered around a fire too small to tame the night. The sky above is a muted expanse, scattered with faint stars struggling to assert themselves through a thin veil of clouds. Your breathing slows, not from calm exactly, but from the recognition that nothing here demands speed. The fire's sporadic warmth continues brushing against your hands. It never reaches your chest, never settles into your shoulders, never comforts your spine. Your bones hold on to their coldness stubbornly, as if determined to remind you where you are. Someone shifts next to you, spreading their cloak more evenly across their legs. Another soldier adjusts the strap of his pack, though he doesn't seem to be preparing to move. The gestures are small, practical, and tinged with quiet fatigue. You mimic none of them. You remain still, letting the fire's inconsistent glow mark time in its own soft way. The flames sink lower for a moment, then flicker back upward. They illuminate the faces across from you. Men staring into the fire as though searching for answers it never provides. Their expressions carry a mixture of resignation and distance. The look of people who have long outlived their own expectations. The firelight softens their features, turning each face into a brief, flickering memory. A log cracks, sending a thin shower of sparks upward. You lean forward slightly, palms open, hoping the flare will offer a momentary surge of warmth. It does, but only barely. The warmth touches your skin. Your bones remain unaffected. The half-sentences that fill the night continue drifting around you. Mentions of marching, mentions of rain, mentions of nothing in particular. Words float into the air, but never quite settle. They dissolve into the same place where the sparks disappear, a space between here and nowhere, claimed by neither. You feel the weight of the day settle deeper into your limbs. The fire pulses in front of you. The wind continues moving through the camp, with the tired sigh of someone closing a door quietly. The night stretches on, unhurried, unbothered. You sit beside the flames, letting the small heat brush your hands again. You know it won't reach your bones. You know it never does. Still, you stay close because the ritual is familiar, and familiar things, even faint warmth, have a way of making the night feel slightly less indifferent. The fire crackles, the men murmur. The field expands into darkness, and the cold inside you settles in with quiet certainty. Patient as ever, waiting for morning to loosen it, only to return again. The night thins into a pale, reluctant morning, its light creeping over the camp in a slow crawl. You rise from the stiffness of half-sleep, brushing ash from your coat as the last smoke trails drift upward from the dying fire. The cold settles in your limbs with the quiet persistence of something that has no intention of leaving. You shoulder your pack and fall into motion with the rest of the regiment, moving toward a horizon muted by fog. The march begins again with the same soft rustle of boots, though the air carries a faint heaviness that suggests the officers expect something significant ahead. No one says as much. The expectation lingers between the ranks, like a rumour too tired to be spoken aloud. You adjust your musket strap and continue forward, stepping over the traces of last night's camp without looking back. The land shifts gradually into open stretches of uneven grass, dotted with the leftovers of old conflicts, broken wheels, rusted metal scraps, and the occasional piece of abandoned cloth half buried in dirt. None of it feels dramatic. Time has softened everything into a kind of muted clutter, like storage left unattended for years. You scan the ground without interest, recognizing that this is how battlefields age once the noise has left them. Somewhere ahead, the terrain dips before rising again, forming a shallow basin where the fog hangs like a loose shroud. The officers lead the regiment toward it with a steady confidence that seems borrowed from the documents sealed with wax back in earlier days. You follow, feeling the shift in the air as the landscape widens into a field that looks too calm for what it is meant to be. Birds perch along a fallen fence, their feathers ruffled in the morning chill. They hop along the wood with the mild curiosity of creatures unbothered by the coming clash. You envy their indifference, though you realise yours isn't far removed. The battlefield holds no dramatic pull, no swelling anticipation. It simply appears a large stretch of land wearing yesterday's dew like a thin veil. Your boots meet the ground with a hollow softness, the soil packed by countless footsteps that came before. You look around. The field is broad enough to host 2 armies, but the emptiness makes it hard to imagine noise filling it. You picture the expected clash, the shouts, the smoke, but the images feel misplaced, like memories borrowed from someone else. A scattering of pikes stand upright near the centre of the field, planted in the ground as markers or reminders. Their wooden shafts lean slightly, tired from seasons of weather. The metal tips catch faint glints of light that seem more accidental than threatening. You step closer to one and notice a chip along its edge, worn by use or by time. It feels like examining a relic in a place not ready to be a museum. Men begin spreading out across the open area, forming lines with the sluggish precision of people completing a routine they have performed too often. The officers gesture in sweeping motions, though their commands hold no urgency. Their voices blend into the morning air, carried off by the wind before fully reaching your ears. You follow the gestures rather than the words, allowing the formation to take shape around you. You stand among your fellow soldiers, your musket angled at your side, your breath steady in the cold. The field stretches before you without revealing anything decisive. The fog lifts in slow curls, unveiling patches of grass flattened by old footsteps. A faint trail of churned soil hints at movements from days or weeks earlier, though you cannot tell which. Everything feels distant, even the earth beneath your feet. Your spine straightens out of habit rather than discipline. You wait, though you aren't sure for what. The officers continue arranging lines, adjusting positions, nodding to themselves. Their horses shift from one hoof to the other, breath puffing in clouds that drift away almost instantly. The wind brushes your cheeks with an indifferent chill. Men murmur quietly along the line. The words barely form, their tones soft and unfinished. Someone mentions the emptiness of the field. Someone else wonders aloud if the other army will arrive today. The comments drift off before reaching certainty. Swallowed by the open air, you find yourself listening for a sound, any sound, that might signal movement beyond the fog. Nothing comes. You scan the far ridge, expecting the silhouette of enemy troops to materialize. The ridge remains blank. Fields roll gently beyond it, shapeless under the early light. You try to imagine an approaching force, but the land refuses to cooperate. It offers only more silence. The men shift their weight, hands tighten on pikes, though more from habit than readiness. You hold your musket loosely, fingers adjusting around the stock. The wood feels cool, as though absorbing the morning's reluctance. You glance down the line and see the same expression on most faces, blended fatigue and mild confusion, as if everyone expected the day to have more direction by now. Minutes stretch, lengthening into something that resembles waiting, but lacks the tension usually associated with it. You find yourself studying the field, its uneven patches, its quiet dips, its small clusters of grass. The land seems indifferent to any future violence. If it has hosted battles before, it no longer bristles with the memory. Instead, it stands like a bored witness, forced to attend another routine it cannot influence. The officers eventually settle in near the front, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. You watch one of them lift a small spyglass and peer through it. His posture suggests determination, but the manner in which he lowers the glass moments later reveals nothing new. He mutters something to the man beside him. They exchange a nod that carries no particular emotion. A gust of wind sweeps across the field, stirring loose dust. It brushes against your coat and carries the faint scent of trampled grass. You adjust your footing slightly, the sole of your boot sliding against a smooth patch of earth. The sensation reminds you of countless other fields, each identical in its quiet surrender to routine. You hear a distant clatter, metal against metal, but it fades as quickly as it reaches you. Perhaps a loose piece of armor shifting, or a musket butt knocked against the ground. The sound leaves no echo. You wait for another clue, another signal, but the air remains still, A few soldiers begin shifting in place, rolling their shoulders, stretching stiff backs. The posture of readiness slowly melts into a posture of endurance. You feel your own stance soften, your weight settling more comfortably as the minutes continue their slow march. The battlefield remains empty, a blank page unwilling to accept ink. You glance at the pikes planted nearby. Their presence adds a ceremonial air to the field, as if they stand not in anticipation of combat, but as placeholders in a tableau everyone feels obliged to participate in. The metal tips sway slightly in the breeze, giving the impression that the weapons themselves are deciding whether to take this potential clash seriously. A thin haze of smoke rises from a distant patch of land, perhaps a farmhouse or campfire, but it does not thicken or drift closer. It hovers like a distant memory of conflict, not a present threat. You watch it until it fades into the sky. The field remains as it was, open, calm, uninterested. You grip your musket more firmly, though the gesture feels ceremonial. The ground beneath you holds no tremors of movement. The air carries no signal of approach. You stand among men waiting for a moment that refuses to reveal itself. Minutes become an unmarked stretch of time. You feel the sun attempt to warm the air, but its light reaches you only as a thin glow. The officers speak quietly among themselves. You hear nothing decisive in their tone, and the battlefield, if it can be called that, waits with you, unmoved by your presence, unimpressed by your formation, and utterly uninterested in the drama it is supposed to hold. You stand in the middle of it all, a soldier in the midst of an almost battle, waiting for urgency that never arrives, as though the war has forgotten to include you today, and the land has forgotten what you came here for. The field eventually settles into its own silence, the kind that comes after nothing has happened for long enough that even expectation feels misplaced. The lines relax in small increments, shoulders easing, feet shuffling, hands loosening their grip on pikes and muskets. No signal announces the shift. The stillness simply becomes too heavy to maintain. You let your stance soften with the others, breathing in the cold air that hangs like a damp curtain over the open ground. The officers drift into quiet discussions on horseback, their voices indistinct, carried off by the same wind that refuses to bring any sign of another army. The field remains stubbornly empty, indifferent to your presence. One of the men near you clears his throat and offers a small tired remark about the morning light, or perhaps about the soil or the smell of the place. The words float into the air without shape, landing somewhere between observation and habit. You nod faintly, not because you understand him, but because it feels like the correct response in a moment that demands nothing. A soldier on your other side mutters something about a town he once passed through. Its name, its colour, its bread. His voice dips halfway through the description, tapering off before the thought can anchor itself. He shrugs, as though admitting defeat to his own memory, and rests his hands on the top of his musket. You hear the faint rattle of the metal against wood, a rhythmic sound that blends easily with the low wind brushing across the grass. Your own voice emerges without intention, offering a small comment of your own, something about the air, or the march, or the distant ridge. You don't finish the sentence. The words dissolve into the open space around you, as if the land absorbs them before they can form fully. The men around you respond with the same muted nods, acknowledging the sound rather than its meaning. The conversation continues like that, unfinished sentences drifting between half-present minds. A remark about a river fades before anyone hears the end. A memory of a farm turns into a pause, long enough to be mistaken for sleep. Someone tries to describe the layout of a street in a city whose name he can't quite recall. His hands move in vague gestures, tracing shapes that do not match the words, then fall back to his sides when he gives up. You listen to these fragments, stitching them together into a kind of collective murmur. It resembles the rustle of fabric more than speech, a soft brushing of thoughts against the edges of consciousness. None of it resolves into clarity. You sense that no one expects it to. Someone near the front of the line laughs quietly, just a short exhale through the nose. It's unclear what prompted it. Perhaps he remembered something amusing from years ago, or perhaps he simply needed to release a breath in a different shape. The sound fades quickly, swallowed by the wide field. You feel a question forming somewhere in your mind, but the shape of it slips away before it reaches your tongue. Instead, you make a small sound that might be agreement or might be confusion. The soldier beside you accepts it as conversation. He responds with his own half-formed thought about a harvest that never happened, or a promise someone made to him. His words drift into the same haze that blankets the field. The breeze strengthens slightly, pushing loose strands of hair across your forehead. You brush them away without noticing. The air carries the distant scent of trampled grass and something faintly metallic, old iron perhaps, or tools forgotten at the edge of the field. The smell lingers long enough to remind you of a memory that never quite exists. You reach for it, feel it slipping, then let it go. A soldier a few paces away tilts his head, as if listening to something only he can hear. After a long moment, he says, "It sounded like," but never finishes the thought. The rest of the sentence hangs between you before fading. No one asks for clarification. Your own memories shift uneasily inside you. You try to summon an image of home, the shape of a roof, the pattern of a fence, the sound of a river near a childhood path. Pieces appear, but nothing fits. The place feels both familiar and unreachable. A story someone told you long ago. You try again, focusing on faces, voices, tools, resting on walls, the taste of water from a familiar well. Nothing forms clearly. Everything blurs into something close to recognition, but always just out of reach. You realize the others wear the same expression, eyes slightly narrowed, brows relaxed, mouths faintly parted as if waiting for their own lost memories to step forward. But none of them do. You are all searching for something only vaguely shaped, a home that might have shifted or vanished in the years since you last claimed it. A man across from you attempts to speak more clearly, saying something about a sister or a friend or an orchard. His voice wavers as though uncertain whether the memory belongs to him. He pauses, swallows once, and lets the rest of the idea fall away. He rubs at the back of his neck, his fingers tracing a path worn by habit. Another soldier whispers about a song he can almost recall. He hums a few notes, soft, wavering, uncertain. The melody dissolves before it reaches anything recognizable. He shakes his head lightly, amused or disappointed, or perhaps both. The hum hangs in the air for a moment, lonely and incomplete. You shift your weight from one leg to the other, the ground crunching softly beneath your boot. The sound pulls a few men from their drifting thoughts. One asks a question that sounds like, "Do you remember?" but the rest of his words drift off before the question becomes real. You wait for him to continue. He does not. Your breath leaves your lungs slowly, fogging in the cool air. You listen to the small sounds around you, the creak of leather, the clink of metal buckles, the soft exhale of bored horses. The field holds these noises gently, without amplifying them. Everything feels muted, restrained, suspended. Someone mentions a river again, though this time the description is shorter. Someone else wonders aloud whether the land will ever feel like itself again. The men around you nod, slowly, thoughtfully, though none offer certainty. A sense of drifting settles over the group. Not movement, but drifting, the way thoughts wander without direction, floating between memory and imagination. You look at the faces near you. They seem thinner in the morning light, not weaker, but more transparent, like ideas of people rather than men, anchored by pasts and futures. You speak again, saying something simple, something without weight, a comment about the weather or the ridge or the way the grass moves. The sentence falters halfway through. You let it go. The air takes it gently. The man beside you murmurs in response, though his own words collapse before reaching form. You exchange a faint glance, a small acknowledgement that neither of you expected clarity anyway. The field remains quiet, not from tension, but from the sprawling emptiness of minds too tired to complete their own thoughts. You feel strangely aligned with the land, both of you holding fragments of stories that refuse to resolve into anything whole. Another gust of wind moves through the ranks. You inhale, feeling the coolness settle into your chest. You exhale, and your breath disappears into the open space. The conversations fade again, not because they ended, but because they were never truly built to begin. The murmured fragments of conversation dissolve into the open field until only the faint rustle of fabric and the shifting of boots remain. A low gust cuts across the ground, nudging you toward a more practical thought, the one that returns each day at roughly the same hour. Hunger arrives not with urgency, but with a flat persistence, the way a clerk taps the same corner of the same page each morning because it is the habit required of him. Men begin drifting toward the wagons where the cook works, their movements slow and uncoordinated, like shadows dragged forward by necessity rather than desire. You follow them at the same pace, neither leading nor lagging, your steps tracing the worn trail through the grass. The fire beneath the cooking pot smoulders weakly, as if reluctant to contribute more than a suggestion of heat. The cook stands beside the large iron cauldron, sleeves rolled to elbows, face lined with the kind of patience that comes only from feeding people who expect very little. He stirs the pot with a long wooden ladle, the liquid inside making a soft, continuous swirl, like a thought turning in circles. You smell the broth before you reach it, something vaguely herbal, vaguely meaty, vaguely edible. It carries the scent of food the way an old letter carries the memory of handwriting, present, but faint and fading. You join the line without ceremony. The men ahead of you shift from foot to foot, not out of restlessness, but to ease the ache that comes from standing in one position too long. Their shoulders slump with the quiet acceptance of ritual. A tin bowl clinks against another. Someone coughs softly. A nearby soldier lifts his collar against the cooling breeze. When your turn arrives, the cook glances at you with eyes that seem trained to withhold judgment. He dips the ladle into the broth and raises it slowly, letting the thin liquid drip back into the pot, before tipping the rest into your bowl. The broth lands with a dull splash, a grey ripple that settles almost immediately. It looks the same as it did yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, a colour somewhere between ash and murky river water. You nod to the cook out of habit. He nods back with the same tired motion. You find a place near the cart where the ground is slightly less uneven, and sit. The bowl warms your palms, though the heat is shallow, fading quickly as the wind brushes across it. The first sip tastes like boiled roots, faint salt, and a whisper of something meant to mimic meat. It is not unpleasant. It is simply there, an edible presence, no more expressive than the mud on your boots. The broth is thin enough to drink, but you still use your spoon out of some unspoken agreement with the routine. You lift small amounts to your lips, letting the warmth touch your tongue before sliding down your throat. Your stomach responds with a quiet gratitude, not for the flavour, but for the fact that it is no longer entirely empty. Around you, the men eat in similar silence. The only real sound is the soft tapping of spoons against metal and the low murmur of wind moving between them. A few attempt conversation, but the effort fades quickly, swallowed by the practical focus of eating. Words feel unnecessary when the task demands so little attention. You take another sip, noting the consistency, neither thicker nor thinner than usual. The cook has mastered the science of stretching ingredients. The broth tastes like discipline, or perhaps resignation, two flavours that have grown interchangeable over the long months of travel and conflict. You find that the blandness has its own comfort. A consistent disappointment is, in its own way, predictable enough to be reassuring. A man beside you tears off a small chunk of stale bread and dips it into his bowl. The bread softens slightly, though not enough to disguise its age. You watch him chew with slow determination. When you finish your portion of broth, you take your own scrap of bread from your pack. It cracks when you break it, scattering crumbs onto your coat. You raise it to your mouth, half expecting it to resist, and chew until the dryness gives way. No one complains. There is nothing to compare the meal to, no memory vivid enough to contradict its adequacy. Hunger has been trained to understand the difference between satisfaction and sufficiency. Most days it expects only the latter. A man across from you remarks softly about the broth's thickness, noting that it seemed slightly different weeks ago, but he cannot remember how. His comment drifts into the air and disappears before anyone responds. You swallow another mouthful and consider whether he is right. You can't say. The days repeat with such uniformity that even flavour loses the ability to distinguish one from another. Your body accepts the food in the same way it accepts marching and drilling, practically without expectation. The warmth settles in your stomach, spreading outward with slow deliberation. It does not reach your fingers or your feet. It does not erase the ache in your shoulders, but it adds just enough energy to keep you upright, to keep you walking, to keep you part of the shape the regiment forms when it moves. The cook sets the ladle aside for a moment and rubs his temples, wiping a smear of ash onto his brow. Someone hands him a cup of his own broth. He drinks it slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though trying to see what the next pot might look like. You wonder what it feels like to feed so many men so little, day after day, with ingredients that feel more symbolic than substantial. The breeze picks up again, carrying the sounds of metal buckles clicking as men adjust their gear after finishing their meal. You stand, wiping the rim of your bowl with a thumb before sliding it back into your pack. The small action has the feel of something rehearsed many times, a fold in the daily script. A few men stretch their backs. One rolls his neck until it cracks softly. Another taps his bowl with a finger, checking whether a drop remains. The cook begins cleaning the sides of the pot, scraping bits of softened root from the bottom. The motions around you feel choreographed, not by design but by long repetition. You look down at your hands. They feel slightly warmer than before, though it is the temporary warmth of food rather than comfort. Your stomach feels neither full nor empty, just suspended between states, balanced in the familiar middle ground, where hunger becomes routine rather than discomfort. As the men drift away from the cooking area, the wind scatters the last traces of steam rising from the pot. The scent of the broth clings faintly to the air, then fades until even the memory of it seems diluted. You run your thumb along the side of your coat, brushing away a few crumbs. Your hunger quiets, not solved but negotiated with. A compromise struck between need and availability, another small agreement in a war filled with them. You fall back into the slow rhythm of the day, your body carrying the familiar weight of almost enough, steady and unsurprised, just as it always has. The sky makes its choice quietly, as if it prefers understatement. A thin, persistent drizzle arrives not as a spectacle, but as a mild formality, an announcement that the day will continue in a damp tone. At first the drops are small, polite things that tap the brim of your hat and run in faint tracks down your coat. They do not demand anything of you, and so you give them nothing in return, beyond the slow, habitual motion of moving forward. You shoulder your pack and fall into step with the men ahead. The ground underfoot softens quickly, the dry dust of earlier hours surrendering to a steady wet. Each step makes a small sucking sound, the soil accepting your weight with the indifferent patience of something that has been trod upon long enough to expect it. Water beads along the edges of your straps, darkening the leather until it looks as tired as you feel. Your cloak fetches a new scent, earth reopened by rain, damp wool, and the metallic hint that always rises where iron meets water. The drizzle explores the seams of your garments, finding the same places it often finds, collars, cuffs where the fabric rubs against itself. It works patiently, as a clerk might file papers, slight, repetitive motions that eventually produce a result without drama. The result here is a slow erosion of novelty. The weather turns everything into a softened, singed version of itself. You keep pace, not because the route feels urgent, but because the act of continuing is less demanding than the thought of stopping. Stopping would mean deciding where to pitch camp for the wet night, whether to bother with additional shelter, whether to ration the last of the dry wood more stringently. Each choice would require small calculations, and those little calculations add up into something like responsibility. It is easier to let the regiment continue, to allow inertia to shoulder the burden of decisions. Raindrops collect on your eyelashes and sting your cheeks with cold points. They patter on the metal of your musket in soft, irregular rhythms, metallic taps that might be mistaken for a distant, distracted drum. The sound is steady enough to count on, rhythmic enough to let your thoughts move in time with it. Your mind takes refuge in small, repeatable observations. The feel of water beading on gloved skin, the way certain seams soak through first, the particular scent of damp straw mixed with wet leather. Men in the column adjust their cloaks and tighten straps, as if performing an expressionless ritual. Someone mutters about the water seeping into shoes. Another complains in a voice that could be mistaken for irony when he calls the drizzle civilized. You consider answering, but the words feel unnecessary. Language in this weather tends to settle into the same soft, middling sounds as the rain itself. Present, but not urgent. Your joints notice the moisture. It gathers in old aches, sliding into places your body has long since catalogued as vulnerable. Knee sockets complain with a softened creak. Shoulders ache in a way that seems more administrative than the painful. A filing clerk who points out the same error on the same page every morning without anger, just procedure. You shift your pack to distribute weight differently, attempting small mechanical adjustments that offer temporary relief. The road becomes a stitched line of darker and lighter patches. Each boot print fills with water and then receives a new footprint over it, the pattern layering like entries in a ledger. You watch the trail as if reading a record of movement, but it is no more informative than the papers you once saw, sealed with confident wax. It tells you nothing new, only that movement persists. Cattle tucked into hedgerows lift their heads and stare through curtains of rain with unblinking eyes. A dog barks once and then resigns itself to the weather, shaking specks off its fur and returning to the mud. Villages appear as muted rectangles of shelter. Shutters, where they still remain, stubbornly keep the inside world private. People glance out, then disappear. There is an economy to their indifference, a practiced exchange. You pass through, and they commit to not being involved. At some point, the drizzle thickens into a steady, patient rain. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself loudly. It simply persists, filing down the rough edges of the day until everything adopts the same softened outline. Water traces small rivers down your sleeves, drips from the brim of your hat onto the collar of your coat, and then sloughs off into the dirt beneath your boots. Your clothing becomes a map of the day's progress. Darker patches like annotations, lighter spaces where chance spared you. You notice how colours lose their confidence in this weather. Greens become muffled, browns deepened, and any flash of brightness swallowed by the rain's even hand. Flags hang limp. Banners sag, their designs blurred by wet. Even the gleam of metal fades under the same grey wash. The world adopts an even tone, neither hopeful nor despairing, merely efficient in a way that feels almost bureaucratic. The officers ride with faces set in the usual mask of resolve. Their edges blur into the drizzle, making their expressions less legible, which suits everyone. Decisions still arrive, an adjustment of pace, a choice of which lane to follow through the marsh, but they fall into the same small practical forms. Short sentences, economical gestures, a few words traded in passing. No speeches, no flare-ups, nothing theatrical. The rain smooths over the idea of grand strategy until it reads like a line in a ledger. You find the rhythm of your steps aligning with the rain's tap. The cadence steadies your thoughts. You begin to think in small, manageable units. Walk to that tree, reach the fence, cross the ditch. The day compresses into check boxes. You don't have to file yourself. Each completed task dissolves into the next, with a quiet finality that prevents rumination. At one resting point, men huddle beneath a low shelter where a leaning shed offers partial cover. You perch on an overturned crate, the wood damp and smelling faintly of old grain. A kettle near the rear of the column hisses and spits as someone tries to coax a usable flame from wet wood. Smoke mingles with rain in strange half-hearted clouds, the smell of smoke losing its usual clarity when chased by water. The cook offers a cup of weak tea. You accept without ceremony. It warms your palms but not your insides. The ritual of drinking something hot becomes a placeholder for care not given. A child, no older than 10, watches the column pass from under a straw roof, eyes wide with curiosity and the peculiar composure of those raised in conflict. You meet his gaze for a moment. His face is clean enough to prove someone still cares. He raises a small hand and then withdraws it, as if the motion was a test of whether the world will respond. You give a small nod. He looks away quickly. The rain keeps him safe in his motion. By mid-afternoon, your clothes feel heavy, water weighing them down like small obedient animals pulling at your limbs. The drizzle has a grinding patience. It keeps working at you until the armor's edges grow darker and the seams hold tiny rivulets. You breathe in steadily, letting water fill the space around your ribs and acknowledging that your body has adapted to carry more than it once did. The road curves and narrows into a lane sheltered by old oaks. Their branches drip in steady, polite intervals. Passing beneath their canopy offers a temporary illusion of shelter, leaves catching some of the rain, spattering it down in slow beads rather than sheets. The difference is slight but appreciated. You move beneath the trees in a line like a procession. The shadows damp and dark. A small quarrel starts between two soldiers over a spot for the next night's fire. The argument is brief, more like a quarrel between clerks over a misplaced file than between men with teeth to bite. Voices rise with the weather's agitation, then fizzle out as rain waters down tempers. In the end, one man shrugs, the other accepts it, and both set about the practicalities without further ado. Decisions settled, nothing heroic declared. The moment passes, filed away under routine. The hours blur as the sky maintains its steady downpour. You mark time by small details. The way water draws streaks along the side of a wagon, the shallow pooling at the base of a stone, the odd pattern that forms on your sleeve where salt from sweat meets rain. Your thoughts ebb and withdraw with the rain's rhythm, full of small, practical judgments instead of visions or plans. You conserve energy, you conserve feeling. When the light finally shifts toward evening, it does so in the same steadfast manner as the rain, without drama, almost apologetically. The drizzle becomes a thinner whisper, then a memory. Your armor remains damp, your joints hold the day's record in their aches. You feel filed down, edges softened, attention narrowed, priorities reduced to the manageable. You stop only because the officers decide to, and you accept the campsite without fanfare. Pitching tents in wet earth is a particular kind of work, precise and modest. Every knot seems sloppier in the wet, each tarp heavier. You sleep later with a dull approval, another set of small tasks completed under indifferent weather. Decisions were required, yes, but they were small ones, the kind you do without framing them in thought. You lie down on a damp bedroll, feeling the cold settle in again, like an old ledger closing for the night. The rain's trace lingers on your skin and cloth, an invisible record of a day that preferred perseverance to drama. You let your breath ease out slowly, cataloguing the day by the way water changed the textures of everything around you. Outside, the drizzle keeps its quiet appointment with the land. Inside, you fold yourself the way you always do, neither resigned nor hopeful, merely practiced. The rain has filed you down to a workable shape, blunt, evened, ready for tomorrow's small demands. You close your eyes and listen to the last thin taps on the tent, counting them not as interruptions, but as the neat, regular punctuation of a day survived. By the time the rain thins into mist, the road feels softer beneath your boots, its edges blurred from the hours of steady drizzle. The men walk with the sluggish awareness of those who know one more stretch of ground will lead only to another. The clouds hang low and swollen, unwilling to fully release or restrain themselves. Your coat clings to you like a damp promise, heavy enough to remind you it exists. Officers slow the pace near a cluster of low stone buildings. Their silhouettes emerge from the mist in quiet shapes. Barns, cottages, and at their centre, a church with a square tower that rises no higher than a stubborn tree. Moss creeps along its stones, drinking happily from the long wet day. The door stands ajar, not with invitation, but with indifference, as if its hinges have grown tired of the idea of fully closing. The column halts without ceremony. Men peel away from their positions, drawn instinctively toward the largest structure with a roof sturdy enough to resist the rain's persistence. You follow, not because you expect comfort, but because the pace of the day nudges you toward the threshold, the way all motions have nudged you forward. Inside, shadows hold the space with a soft padded stillness, the scent of incense. Whatever faint trace remains after years of war and weather hides behind layers of damp wool, worn leather, and breath that carries fatigue more than anything else. Your boots scrape against stone as you step in, echoing faintly across the vaulted ceiling. The sound does not travel far. It dies comfortably rather than dramatically, absorbed by walls accustomed to listening. A few candles burn in simple sconces near the altar, their flames steady but modest. Their light touches the edges of prayer books, carved figures, and the corner of a wooden rail rubbed smooth by countless hands. You move farther inside and feel the air shift. It is neither warmer nor drier, but it carries the weight of a place that once held purpose. The walls do not question you. They have seen too many people in too many states to form opinions. You find a long pew near the centre. Its wood is scarred by time, burnished by use, softened by moisture. You run your fingers along the grain, feeling each ridge like a small history etched into the polished surface. Your muscles respond with a sigh when you sit. It is not comfort exactly, but the absence of movement feels close enough. Around you, men settle with the same quiet resignation. Some lean back and close their eyes. Others remove their cloaks and lay them across the pews, creating makeshift barriers between skin and wet cloth. A few whisper in low voices, comments about the day or the cold or the strange stillness of this borrowed shelter. None of the words rise high enough to disturb the air. You lie back, letting your head rest against the cold wood. The quiet feels deliberate, though no one enforces it. The church holds silence the way a body holds breath, naturally, without effort. You listen to the faint patter of rain striking the roof, muffled by tiles that have weathered more storms than you can imagine. Each drop creates a soft note, part of a long, irregular rhythm that soothes without promising anything. Your eyes drift across the ceiling. The beams above you meet in a simple arrangement, sturdy but unadorned. Any artwork that may have once decorated the space has been lost to time or conflict, leaving only smooth expanses of stone and wood. You imagine how sermons once echoed here, how hymns once rose from the congregation, how candles once filled the air with warmth. The imagination does not last long. Everything you conjure feels too distant to belong to this version of the world. A soldier near the front coughs, a dry, worn-out cough. It bounces off the walls in a dull repetition before settling into silence again. A few men glance his way, then return to their own drifting thoughts. Another man rubs his knees as if they're gears needing lubrication. The motion slow and unembarrassed. You feel the chill of your wet clothes merging with the pew beneath you. Your body adjusts with the slow acceptance that comes from too many such nights. You do not expect the wood to warm. You simply expect it to hold you, and it does. A faint draught enters from somewhere near the altar. It carries the smell of old stone mingled with the faintest trace of soot from a long-dead candle. The draught touches your cheek, cool and light, and then disappears. You breathe in deeply, letting the air settle into you as if you are learning to inhabit the space. Someone lights another candle. The match flares brightly for an instant, its glow illuminating the soldier's face before shrinking into a steady, obedient flame. The candle flickers once, then holds firm, its light stretching across the floorboards and catching the edges of dust. The dust moves reluctantly, stirred by the shifting of bodies as men settle more deeply into their chosen places. You listen to the echoes that linger, small, unimportant sounds that barely take form, the scrape of a buckle, the shifting of a cloak, a sigh released without meaning to be heard. The echoes do not judge. They make no distinction between soldier and villager, believer and stranger. They simply exist, running along the stone walls like threads woven into an old tapestry. Your mind drifts in the quiet, floating between thoughts without settling. You think of nothing in particular, just the warm taste of broth earlier, the weight of rain on your shoulders, the way the clouds have held their shape all day. The thoughts soften, losing definition as the church absorbs them into the larger stillness. A small pool of water gathers beneath the end of your cloak, where rain dripped from the hem. You watch it spread slowly across the stone floor, forming a thin, reflective patch. The candlelight dances across its surface, breaking into delicate ripples when someone shifts nearby. The moment holds your attention for longer than it deserves. A soldier next to you leans forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped. His eyes are open but unfocused, staring at a point somewhere between the pews. He whispers something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a memory, but the words remain too soft to decipher. His breath forms a faint cloud in the cool air before dispersing. Farther down the aisle, someone pulls off one boot and massages his ankle, grumbling quietly to himself. The sound is mild, almost gentle, carrying none of the frustration such tasks usually bring. It's simply another small duty to be performed before rest can claim him. The door creaks softly in the wind. It doesn't close, nor does it fully open. It sways with an indecision that mirrors the mood inside. Through the gap, you catch the muted glow of the cloudy evening. The rain eases into a whisper, droplets lingering on the threshold before sliding down in thin rivulets. You stretch out on the pew, letting your body occupy the narrow space. Your head rests on your folded arms. The wood is cool and slightly rough, but it feels dependable. The lingering scent of incense, faint as a forgotten memory, mingles with the dampness of your clothes. For a moment you imagine the church breathing around you, the walls expanding and contracting with the weight of the night. Your eyelids grow heavy, though sleep does not claim you fully. Instead you drift between waking and rest, held in a state where thoughts move slowly, as if wading through thick water. You hear a soldier whisper something about a mother's voice. Another mentions a field he once worked. These words fade before becoming stories. No one asks anyone else to continue. A candle gutters suddenly, its flame dipping low before rising again. You watch its resilience with a quiet sense of recognition. It flickers, yes, but it remains. It doesn't warm the space, doesn't chase the cold from your bones, doesn't promise comfort, yet its persistence feels strangely steadying. You close your eyes fully this time. The echoes continue, their soft, indifferent wandering. The church breathes its large, ancient breath around you. The stone walls hold you without choosing sides. And you rest, not because the pew is soft, not because the space welcomes you, but because the world outside has paused, and the stillness inside offers a temporary reprieve from the wet, demanding march that waits beyond the door. You leave the shelter of the church in a slow drift, stepping back into the world as if emerging from underwater. The air outside carries a faint chill, the kind that lingers after a long rain, but has no ambition to deepen. Mist clings to the ground in thin folds, folding itself around your boots with a soft, reluctant touch. The quiet inside the church follows you out, trailing behind like a reluctant thought. Men gather their cloaks, reset straps, nudge their packs into place. No one hurries. The movement has the flavour of routine, motions made not out of eagerness, but because the day requires them. You fall into the column as it forms again, the line stretching along the road like a memory trying to hold its shape. The first steps after leaving shelter always feel heavier than they should. Your joints remember the coldness of the pew more clearly than the slight warmth of rest. They click in familiar patterns, soft complaints delivered with bureaucratic consistency. You adjust the musket against your shoulder and begin walking. The road leads away from the cluster of buildings in a gentle curve, heading into a landscape that appears both familiar and uninterested in being anything else. The mud left behind by yesterday's rain has dried unevenly, cracked in careful lines like an unfinished map. You follow the road because there is nothing else to follow. The officers point ahead because ahead is the only direction that requires no explanation. The first stretch feels long not because of distance, but because the morning light offers so little variety. Everything wears the same muted tone. Trees, stones, shrubs, the occasional abandoned plough half sunk in damp earth. Even the sky adopts the same heavy shade, hanging like a ledger sheet that someone forgot to write on. You glance down and notice your shadow stretching thin along the dirt. The morning sun, faint as it is, still manages to draw a shape of you that wavers with each step. Its presence feels oddly reassuring, silent, obedient, always keeping pace. You watch it wobble and stretch and collapse depending on the slope of the road. It asks nothing, which is more than you can say of most companions. The road winds gently through low hills, then straightens into a long, quiet ribbon of earth. Each turn reveals scenery that might as well be the same as the one before. Bushes arranged with indifferent symmetry, stones arranged like punctuation marks in a sentence that doesn't change. You begin to recognize a pattern, not because it is meaningful, but because repetition demands acknowledgement. A man beside you breaks the silence with a comment about the distance travelled. The remark drifts away almost immediately, swallowed by the expanse of the land. You nod in vague agreement, even though you've lost track of what distance feels like. It has become something measured by weariness rather than by miles. A horse snorts ahead, its breath visible in thin curls. The rider pats its neck without looking. The animal shakes its mane, sending droplets of leftover moisture into the air. The small gesture feels more alive than anything else on the road. Your feet fall into a rhythm so steady, it begins to erase thought. Your mind floats on top of the motion, drifting from one vague idea to another. You think of water on stone, of the slow way vines creep along walls, of a memory of a voice you can no longer attach to a face. Everything feels softened by the long march, blurred at the edges like words left too long in the rain. The road curves again, revealing the same stretch of land dressed in slightly different angles. You follow it without thinking. The landscape acts like an exhausted clerk, stamping the same form again and again, each stamp slightly altered by hand, but ultimately identical. A small flock of birds crosses overhead, cutting quick arcs against the pale sky. Their chirping is thin but carries a brightness that does not match the ground below. They disappear toward a cluster of distant trees, leaving behind the soft echo of their movement. You watch them vanish, wishing briefly that your own path held such direct purpose. The wind picks up, brushing against your coat and sliding between the seams. It brings with it a faint smell of smoke from somewhere unseen. Perhaps a farmhouse, perhaps a burning heap of brush, perhaps a memory stuck to the wind's tail. You inhale slowly. The scent is faint enough to leave doubt. You let the doubt sit. The man behind you hums something barely audible, a tune with no structure. The hum fades when the road dips and returns when it rises. It settles into the march like a companionable artifact of thought. You listen without acknowledging it, letting the sound merge with the rhythm of your steps. You adjust your pack as it begins to slide lower on your spine. The strap rubs against your shoulder in a familiar stripe of ache. The sensation no longer feels intrusive. It has become a kind of punctuation in your day, marking the slow progress in increments your mind doesn't bother to count. The officers ride ahead, exchanging brief signals. Their movements are precise, but lack urgency, shaped more by duty than by intent. You watch them with a distant curiosity, not questioning their choices, because questioning requires energy you prefer to spend on walking. Decisions are easier when someone else makes them. You follow because the road insists on continuation. Hours trickle past like water through fingers. The sun shifts position without shifting mood. It brightens enough to cast clearer shadows, but not enough to warm your face. Your shadow grows sharper, then softens again as the light filters through veiling clouds. You watch the shape respond to each change, patient and uncomplaining. Someone up ahead stumbles, catching his balance after a few awkward steps. No one comments. You all have your moments, slips, missteps, brief hesitations that remind you that bodies are fallible machines. The road forgives easily. It only requires that you keep moving. A cart creaks behind the column, its wheels pushing through softened earth. The wooden spokes moan with each rotation. You glance back at it occasionally. Its slow, determined progress serves as a reminder that everything here is carried by repetition. The wheels, the boots, the clouds overhead, all moving at their own predetermined pace. Around midday, the sky changes its mind and dims slightly, though no rain falls. The clouds create the illusion of late afternoon, even though the day still has hours to offer. You do not welcome the confusion, but you accept it. Time has become more impression than measurement. The light changes, and you adjust your expectations without debate. You step over a fallen branch, its bark softened by yesterday's rain. The wood cracks under your boot, producing a sound that momentarily breaks the rhythmic monotony. You look down reflexively, then continue walking. The fragment of noise fades behind you. As the road bends toward a shallow valley, you notice how the land folds gently. Hills rising in slow waves that could lull you into believing you are making progress. But each crest reveals another, identical in shape and distance, leading your body forward in a loop disguised as direction. Your shadow wavers across the road, stretching thin when the path inclines, shrinking when it dips. At times it looks almost detached from you, walking ahead or lagging behind like something trying to remember its role. You find its persistence oddly comforting. If nothing else, it reminds you that the light still acknowledges your existence. The column moves into the valley and then out again, the motion seamless, almost imperceptible. You breathe in the smell of the damp earth rising from the soil, an old patient smell, content to exist without ambition. You shift your musket to your other shoulder. The relief is small but noticeable. The weapon's weight lands differently, altering the pull on your back. You adjust your coat collar against the growing wind. The gesture feels routine, another note in the daily sequence. The road stretches onward, promising nothing new. But the act of walking fills the space between breaths. Your shadow continues to wobble beside you, loyal, quiet and uncomplicated, a companion shaped entirely by light. And so you move forward, not with hope or dread, but with the steady acceptance that the world will offer exactly as much as it intends, and the road will repeat itself as many times as necessary until you stop asking it for anything else. The road eventually widens into a clearing. the earth flattened in a way that suggests wagons once lingered here, or perhaps soldiers like you paused long enough to leave their weight pressed into the ground. The column slows without a command. It simply happens. One man easing his step, another taking the cue, and then the whole line settling into stillness, as if the land itself asked for a moment of quiet. You adjust your feet, grateful for the pause, not because you needed rest, but because standing still offers a different kind of monotony, one that lets your thoughts shift at their own pace. Your shadow folds beneath you as the sun slips behind a cloud, softening its shape until it becomes more suggestion than silhouette. The officers gather near a small outcropping of stones, their horses stamping at the earth with mild impatience. A few soldiers straighten instinctively, though none of them seem entirely certain what is expected. You watch as the commander dismounts, boots sinking slightly into the softened dirt. He brushes his coat with the back of his hand, a gesture made more out of habit than pride. He steps onto the flattest stone, not elevated enough to be dramatic, but high enough that his voice can drift a little farther. The regiment forms a loose semicircle around him. Though forms may be too strong a word, it is more of a gentle drifting into place. You stand where the movement carries you, not close enough to catch the details of his face, but close enough to hear the general shape of what he intends to say. He clears his throat. It echoes faintly, carried by the open air with the same weight as a page turning in an empty room. Then he speaks. The words begin with structure, phrases that sound like they were once intended to inspire. He mentions duty or honour, or perhaps necessity. It's hard to tell. The consonants arrive clearly, but the meaning dissolves before reaching you. His tone lacks the urgency of a man rallying soldiers, and instead carries the flat cadence of someone reading from an old document whose ink has faded. You nod when the men around you nod. You exhale when they exhale. The rhythm of the group becomes your guide to understanding, even if the speech itself refuses to cling to your thoughts. The commander's voice lifts for a moment, perhaps recounting an order issued from a distant lord, or recounting some strategic goal. His hands gesture in the air, shaping concepts that drift away almost immediately. He points to the west, though no one turns to look. The gesture feels purely administrative. A sentence lands heavily on your ears, something about perseverance, or endurance, or simply continuing. You feel no spark of emotion, no surge of purpose. Instead, the words glide over your awareness, like raindrops rolling off wax, present briefly, then gone. You register only the vague instruction that whatever you have been doing, you should keep doing. The commander continues. His voice never strains, never softens, never cracks. It maintains the same steady tone, the sort of tone a scribe might use when listing grain stores for the month. The effect is oddly soothing. You do not have to hold on to anything he says. The speech asks nothing of your memory. A gust of wind cuts across the clearing and shifts the sound slightly, warping vowels into something rounder, gentler. The commander waits a moment, adjusting his footing, then resumes. The soldiers shift as well, one man rolling his shoulders, another tightening his belt, another rubbing his palms along his trousers to remove dust that immediately returns with the breeze. A horse snorts near the edge of the gathering. Its reins jingle softly. The commander doesn't acknowledge it. His focus remains on the invisible outline of duty he is trying to draw with his words. You watch him as you might watch a craftsman, shaping something you know will never be finished. There is a sincerity to the attempt, but the intent cannot reach you through the layers of fatigue that have accumulated over months, perhaps years. He says something about the road ahead. You catch only fragments: necessary, movement, orders, expectation. The words hover in your mind for a moment, and then drift away like dust carried by the wind. You imagine they would sound the same even if the war were on a different continent, even if the army were made of different men. The speeches change less than the weather. A man beside you murmurs a soft agreement to a point you didn't hear. The soldier behind you lets out a breath that might be a sigh, or might simply be the body's attempt to stay awake. Someone further back shifts their weight, causing the dirt to crunch in a familiar rhythm. The structure of the speech continues, but the attention given to it thins like stretched cloth. You glance at the sky. Clouds pass lazily, uninterested in the moment. A few shafts of sunlight break through and land in uneven patches on the ground. Soft beams that illuminate the dust rising from the soldier's feet. One patch of light falls across the commander's shoulder, catching in the small metal clasp on his coat. It glints once, sharply, then fades as the cloud reclaims its coverage. The commander's voice descends into its concluding cadence. You can tell not because of the meaning, but because the tone gathers the faint authority of finality. The men around you shift, as if preparing to resume movement. You nod along, mirroring the reactions of those nearest to you, even though you could not repeat a single sentence you have just heard. The speech ends with a gesture, perhaps meant to be stirring, perhaps symbolic, perhaps merely procedural. He raises his hand, lowers it, and steps down from the stone. The officers signal the regiment back into formation. The sounds of preparation rise, the tightening of packs, the settling of musket stocks against shoulders, the creaking of belts and leather. You take a step forward because the column begins to move again. The transition is as smooth as settling dust. There is no shout, no moment of unified morale, no rush of renewed purpose. The speech has done what it needed to do, filled time with official noise, and reminded the officers that leadership still exists in some form. As you fall into the familiar rhythm of walking, the commander's words scatter in your mind like pages of a ledger dropped in the wind. You try to recall one clear idea from his address. Nothing emerges, only a faint sense of continuation, as if the speech was designed less to inform and more to confirm the obvious. That movement must resume. Your shadow reappears beside you as the sun slips free of the cloud again. It stretches long against the road, wobbling with each step. You watch it briefly, grateful for its simplicity. It asks no interpretation. It delivers no instruction. It simply exists, shaped by the light and the body that carries it. In the distance, the landscape rolls forward in gentle, unchanging hills. The road leads into them with the same muted promise as always. You follow, not because of the speech, but because following is what you have learned to do when the road opens itself like another page in a long repetitive book. The commander's voice fades into memory without ever becoming one. Your steps continue, steady and unremarkable. The march resumes as if it had never paused. You stop walking because the world decides for you. The column eases into a long familiar pause where tents will be pitched and rations parcelled, and the small negotiations of shelter will be performed with the economy of habit. Men move with the same deliberate slowness that has governed the day. No haste, no flourish, only the practical choreography of people who know exactly which part of the coat will leak next and which knot will not hold without extra twining. The camp assembles itself with the same indifferent efficiency it always shows. Poles are set into the ground, canvas stretched, pegs driven, hooves are tethered, a cloth is hung to mark the place where clean socks might be dried someday. You help where your hands find work, pulling a peg, adjusting a flap, small tasks that require only muscle memory and no mental ownership. Someone hands you a scrap of bread and a tin cup. You accept both with the same absent gratitude you would show a clerk offering a receipt. The exchange feels less like sustenance than accounting. One bread, one cup, ledger balanced for the night. The light slides away in its usual manner, gradual and unostentatious. Smoke from a dozen small fires threads itself across the sky, thinning and mingling with the starlight until the heavens look smudged, as if someone had taken a palm and wiped the ink of constellations into softer lines. The stars are present but polite. They do not intrude. They glance down, note the movement of men, and return to their indifferent watchfulness. You find a patch of earth cleared by a previous column and spread your blanket. The ground is cool and yields under your weight with a small, tolerant groan. You lie down, the canvas beneath you flattening into a familiar shape. Around you, other bodies settle into their own spaces, each creating a small island of rest. Conversation dwindles into the soft rustle of cloth and the occasional scrape of a spoon against a bowl. The camp sounds like paperwork being filed. Small repeated noises that claim to accomplish something. Your hands move automatically, untying straps, loosening boots, folding them with the economy of someone who has done it more times than they can remember. You stare up into that patched sky, letting the smoke and the sparse stars blur into one another. The contrast between light and soot makes the heavens feel close enough to touch and remote enough to reassure you that nothing up there changes because of the men below. You think briefly of the name you once answered to. It comes as a faint echo, a syllable that might have belonged to a childhood or a ledger entry. You cannot place it. It sits at the lip of memory, polite but evasive, like a man who sends an obliging note and then does not follow up. You let the name go without regret. Aims are an unnecessary expense in this economy of motion. The war has outlived reason, and you have learned to be a unit of persistence rather than a person defined by a title. Around the fire, men talk in hushed tones about small, oddly specific things. The taste of a particular bread, a horse that moved oddly last week, a rumour about a village that may or may not have existed. The subjects are chosen by exhaustion. They are safe to whisper because they do not demand decisions. Occasionally someone offers a dry joke, an observation with the bleak humour of a man who has watched systems fail and still manages to find paperwork amusing. A laugh slips out quick and involuntary, then is swallowed by the dark. It tastes like a secret shared between people who know the absurdity of continuing. You feel your body settle into the night. The cloak beneath your cheek smells faintly of earth and other men. It carries the soft record of many places, a patchwork of smells that reads like a travel log. The blanket does not warm you much, but it draws the cold into a comfortable pattern, the way a ledger holds numbers until someone decides to reconcile them. Sleep is not immediate. It comes in small permissions, a series of agreements your eyelids make with the dark. A soldier nearby murmurs a prayer, or a recollection that sounds like one. The words dissolve into the night. Whether they are for the living or the dead is hard to tell. The echoes do not care which. Stone and sky and smoke take all utterances and file them into their own indifferent memory. The church you sheltered in earlier would have swallowed such a whisper with the same neutral grace. The world is big enough to absorb human claims without needing to adjudicate them. You notice the geometry of the camp, the way lanterns sit like punctuation, the way a row of boots draws a line through the dirt like a sentence that never quite concludes. Shapes become comforting. The curve of a rolled coat, the angle of a sleeping man's arm, the regularity of packs stacked like closed books. In this ordered gloom you feel your edges soften. The self that once flinched at weather reports and orders is now a thinner outline, a figure compressed for storage. The night air cools further. Clouds move across the patch of sky and the stars blink shyly. You breathe slowly, feeling the rhythm of the camp match the pulse in your wrists. Each exhale moves you a little further away from the person who once thought in stories, toward the person who measures survival in simple metrics. Can walk, can eat, can sleep. The inner monologue, if it ever existed in earnest, rearranges its priorities around what keeps you upright tomorrow. Your mind offers a small, dry thought about the absurdity of it all, about seals and signatures and banners that mean so much on paper and so little on mud. You find the humour in it without force. It is a quiet acceptance that slips in like a warm draft under a tent flap. You smile, a fraction of an inch, a motion that costs nothing, and tuck the feeling away like a small sensible coin. A stray ember pops from a nearby fire and flutters upward, joining others in a lazy, unspectacular parade. They float, then die. The movement resembles the daily record of men who once held pride like a bright thing and now carry it like a checklist. Necessary, perfunctory, ultimately unremarkable. Sparks do not judge, they ascend and vanish, leaving no ledger entry worth noting. You allow your thoughts to thin toward nothing. Not the void exactly, but the soft, blank space between entries where ink has not yet been pressed. Sleep approaches like a clerk who has had enough for the day, slow, precise, and entirely matter-of-fact. You find that sleep requires no ceremony. It only requires you to stop resisting and permit the body to recalibrate its quiet machinery. You dream, briefly and without insistence, of a house you half remember. It is painted in a colour you cannot name. A woman, perhaps, stands in a doorway, holding a wooden bowl that might contain soup. The image dissolves before you can measure whether it belongs to memory or invention. The dream is modest, appreciative of small comforts rather than grand narratives. It is the kind of dream that fits into the pocket of a uniform. When sleep deepens, it is not dramatic. You do not flinch into nightmares, nor float into euphoric visions. Instead, you thin gradually, as if your outline is being folded and stacked with many others. Identity becomes a practical term, enough to exchange a greeting, not enough to demand consideration. You are a number in an ongoing accounting, a line item in a report that never gets filed. The night hums on, fires dim to embers, the air cools, and the small sounds of the camp become softer still. Somewhere, a horse shifts and sighs. Someone else repositions a cloak. These are small, attentive acts that do not hope for reward. They are the maintenance of a human system that continues not because it expects a benefit, but because inertia and necessity make it so. You let yourself be swallowed by the ordinary dark. If your name lingers on the tip of memory, it is only to dissolve into the larger, practical ledger the war keeps. There is no dramatization in the erasure, only the quiet efficiency of time doing what it does best, turning people into rhythms and rhythms into the backdrop of yet another day. You drift into a sleep so tired that dreaming is optional, unnecessary. The mind prefers to rest the way a book rests closed, its pages pressed flat and unremarkable. You thin into the quiet, and in that thinning, you discover a small reprieve, a place where the war's arithmetic loosens its grip for a while, and the counting pauses long enough for rest to be possible. Outside, smoke and starlight keep their indifferent vigil. Inside, the camp exhales. You merge with the hum, another figure folded into the long, unending ledger of a war that has learned to persist without applause. You sleep, and that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.